Commissioner, welcome to Meet the Press.
Good to be with you, David.
I wanted to have you on to have this conversation not just about stop and frisk in New York, but about a broader conversation about policing in America and indeed this debate about racial profiling that has grown more intense because of the Trayvon Martin case as well. So, case in point, you've got Judge Scheindlin in New York ruling that the practice of stop and frisk in New York has violated the constitutional rights of minorities. And here's part of her opinion. The city's highest officials, she writes, have turned a blind eye to the evidence that officers are conducting stops in a racially discriminatory manner. In their zeal to defend a policy they believe to be effective, they have willfully ignored overwhelming proof that the policy of targeting the right people is racially discriminatory and therefore violates the United States Constitution. You strongly disagree. Why?
I do strongly disagree. This case cries out for appeal. The judge has indicted the entire New York City Police Department, 35,000 officers of racial profiling on the flimsiest of evidence. You look at the expert for the plaintiff and what he found. He looked at 4.4 million stops over a 10-year period. He found 6% of them were, in his opinion, unjustified. In the trial itself, there were 4 plaintiffs, there were 12 witnesses, there were 19 stops. The judge herself found that 10 of the stops met constitutional muster. There were some problems with the frisk, the judge pointed out. But this is very small evidence, a small amount of information to have such a sweeping finding.
Commissioner,
we believe that they used a faulty formula to do that.
Let me go back to those numbers that you referenced and put it up on the screen for our audience and go through some of those numbers and where some of the criticism is. 4.4 million stops, 6% arrests, 6% summons, 88% no further law enforcement action. And then look at who is getting targeted: 52% black, 31% Hispanic, 10% white. I first want to focus on that 88% number. Of people not doing anything wrong. Does that not say to you, as the commissioner of the police, we're doing too much of this?
No, it doesn't mean that people are not doing anything wrong. If you look at the statute, it says reasonable suspicion that individuals may be about to commit, are committing, or have committed a crime. One of the classic examples that we use is somebody going down the street trying door handles, or a group of young men that a bodega owner fears going to strong-arm rob them when they leave their store. So there's a preventive aspect to this, and people say innocent. That's not the appropriate word.
Well, there was no further law enforcement action.
Well, what you use here is a standard of reasonable suspicion. If you have probable cause, then you have enough to effect an arrest or issue a summons. This, by the way, is a standard law enforcement practice throughout America. It's certainly not just going forward in New York. And as far as your second set of numbers are concerned, we think the reasonable criteria is a criteria that was developed or presented to us by the RAND Corporation, an institution that's been in existence for 100 years, that says that to take a look at racial profiling and determine if it happens, you should first look at the universe of people who are identified by the victims of crime, the perpetrators identified by the victims of violent crime. What does that universe look like? And in New York, that universe certainly comports to the racial makeup of the people who are being stopped.
Well, let me just understand what you're saying. Basically, there are more African Americans and Hispanics who are committing crimes in New York City. Therefore, it justifies a higher percentage of those being stopped on the suspicion that they might do something wrong, that they might commit a criminal act. Because the judge says that's faulty reasoning. She's saying you can't take an innocent population and say that that's the same as a criminal population.
Well, obviously, we don't agree with the judge, and that's why we think an appeal it should go forward here. I mean, it's the fundamental questions that we're looking at. Again, we think the RAND Corporation is a reasonable criteria. We have, by the way, I think it's interesting to point out, we have the most diverse police department probably in the world.
Can you understand the point of view of those African Americans like Charles Blow, who writes a column in the New York Times that says, in part this, equating it to the Trayvon Martin case, as I mentioned at the outset. He writes, the idea of universal suspicion without individual evidence is what Americans find abhorrent and what black men in America must constantly fight. It is pervasive in policing policies like Stop and Frisk, and in this case, Neighborhood Watch, talking about the Trayvon Martin case. Regardless of the collateral damage done to the majority of innocents, it's like burning down a house to rid it of mice.
Yeah, absolutely. We are sensitive to this. Nobody wants to be stopped. At the very least, you're giving up your time. But we need some balance here. The stark reality is that violence is happening disproportionately in minority communities, and that, unfortunately, is in big cities throughout America. We have record low numbers of murders in New York City, record low numbers of shootings. We're doing something right to save lives. Last year, as I said, we had a record low in murders. This year, we're running 30% below that. So let me give you another figure. In the last 11 full years of the Bloomberg administration, there were 7,363 fewer murders in New York City than there were in the preceding 11 years. Now, if history is any guide, those lives saved are largely the lives of young men of color.
If we lose Stop and Frisk,
but I understand the sensitivity of it. People, and I've dealt with this in many community meetings. It's something that is very important in the African American community. I would also submit, though, that the Trayvon Martin case is a little bit different. These are two civilians. It clearly was a tragedy, but it didn't involve sworn police officers.
The mayor has been outspoken on this issue, and I wonder if you agree as a police commissioner. You have a debate for who's going to be the next mayor of New York City. If a program like Stop and Frisk is abandoned, will people die?
Well, I think, no question about it, violent crime will go up. And again, this is not a program. This is something that's integral to policing. This happens throughout America. In any police jurisdiction, you have to do it. Officers have to have the right of inquiry if they see some suspicious behavior. So I can assure you this is not just a New York City issue. It's an issue throughout America. And this case has to be appealed, in my judgment, because it will be taken as a template and had significant impact in policing throughout America.
Commissioner Kelly, we appreciate your time very much.
Thank you.